It began on a quiet day, one of those rare moments when the world felt still, like it was holding its breath. Nobody knew it then, but that was the day everything changed. That was the day humanity proved why they should be feared. The sky looked normal. Blue, endless, soft clouds drifting lazily above. People went to work, sat in traffic, sipped coffee, laughed, argued, lived. Kids ran to school buses with backpacks bouncing behind them. Shop owners unlocked doors and flipped signs from closed to open. It was ordinary, peaceful, forgettable. Until it wasn't. Just past noon, the first signal came. A sudden distortion across every broadcast frequency. TVs, radios, satellites, even underground cabling, everything buzzed with a pulse that made no sense. It wasn't a message in any known language. It wasn't sound exactly, more like pressure in the mind. A deep, vibrating echo that whispered in silence and made hearts beat faster for no clear reason. People looked at each other, confused. A few tried to brush it off. Others stopped what they were doing and stared at the sky, sensing something wrong, something off. The signal hit everyone at once. From the deepest ocean rigs to the highest mountain villages. From the richest nations to the most forgotten corners. It didn't care about borders or race or status. Just was. Within an hour, the first satellite fell. It didn't explode, it was gently lowered like an offering, placed in the middle of an empty desert in northern Africa. The thing was burnt on one side, ice-covered on the other. Yet somehow the signal kept coming. Stronger. Sharper. As if something was listening back now. People panicked. The military scrambled. Every major power went on high alert. Fighter jets took off. Missiles were prepped. Leaders gathered in bunkers. No one was sure who or what they were dealing with. Hackers were blamed. Then terrorists. Then rogue nations. But none of it made sense. The data didn't lie. The signal wasn't coming from Earth. It was here but not from here. By evening, the first images appeared. Not through our own satellites but beamed directly into the screens of millions of devices. A sky not ours. Stars unfamiliar. Shapes, massive angular things, drifting through the void. Not ships, not exactly. Not alive either. But moving. Watching. Waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't explain. They simply let us see them. People cried. Some prayed. Some laughed, tight, nervous laughs that didn't last long. Cities dimmed their lights. Planes were grounded. Stock markets crashed. Children were pulled out of schools. People locked their doors, though no one could say what good that would do. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the signal stopped. A full day passed. No word. No warning. Nothing. But the fear lingered like smoke. Until the sky cracked. It didn't explode, didn't scream. Just opened. A soft rippling distortion high above the Pacific like heat on asphalt. And through it came the first real proof that we were no longer alone. It looked like a storm cloud at first. But it moved wrong. Against the wind. Against gravity. It curled in on itself like a living thing. Lights flickered within it, blue, green, orange, colors we'd never seen before, shifting in ways the human eye struggled to process. It hovered silently, then expanded, spreading like ink in water. That's when the disappearances began. Whole islands, gone. Atolls that had existed for thousands of years were simply no longer there. Not destroyed. Not underwater. Just erased as though plucked out of time. Fishing boats vanished. Submarines went dark. SOS signals came and went in seconds, too fast for anyone to respond. And then came the voices. Not through machines. Not through speakers. They came inside. People began to hear whispers. Not everyone. Just a few. Scattered across the world. Farmers in remote fields. Pilots mid-flight. Children in quiet rooms. The whispers came in their own languages, soft and polite. You do not belong. You have not been chosen. Leave. But leave where? We were already home. Panic turned to rage. That's when the resistance formed, not from governments, not from armies, but from us. People. Ordinary, tired, angry, terrified people who'd had enough. Enough running. Enough fear. Enough waiting to be told what was going to happen next. It started small. A group of engineers in Poland redirected weather satellites to try and disrupt the cloud's movements. A mechanic in Brazil figured out how to amplify the old Soviet sonar arrays to pick up non-standard frequencies. A deaf student in Japan who had never spoken a word began drawing symbols that matched the ones inside the cloud. No one told them to do these things. They just did. Something was waking up in us. Something old. Something wild. The invaders, or whatever they were, had expected submission. They'd expected silence. They had not expected the noise of human defiance. It wasn't organized, not at first. It was messy, chaotic, dangerous. But it was real. For the first time, the fear didn't belong only to us. The skies above Russia turned red. The clouds above Mexico burned violet. The oceans groaned. Something was reacting to our presence, pushing back. But we didn't run. We didn't hide. We pushed harder. Someone figured out the symbols had rhythm. A kind of mathematical melody. Not music exactly, but close enough. We began to answer the whispers. Not with language. With pattern. With code. With fire and steel and noise. And they listened. On the third night, a ship landed. It didn't look like anything from our stories. No metal. No engines. No lights. Just stillness. A void in space shaped like a dream half remembered. It hovered above a salt flat, casting no shadow, making no sound. One person walked toward it. She was a biologist. Never fired a weapon. Barely slept. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. People begged her to wait. To analyze. To study. But she said something none of us ever forgot. If we wait for permission to be brave, we'll always be afraid. She stepped forward. The ship responded. A shimmer. A pulse. And then she was gone. Not disintegrated. Not taken. Just gone. Silence followed. An hour passed. Then a scream, raw, human, desperate, echoed through the plains. Not hers. Theirs. It was the sound of something in pain. She came back. Naked. Cold. Eyes burning. Covered in marks that glowed briefly, then faded. They're not gods, she whispered. They're cowards. That changed everything. The attacks began that same night. We didn't win, not exactly. Not at first. But we didn't lose either. Every weapon we'd built in fear of each other was turned outward. But the true weapons weren't missiles or drones. It was us. It was the woman who held her dying son and still managed to aim the last flare gun at the sky, warning others. It was the old man who hacked into a weather balloon array and fed false coordinates to confuse the enemy. It was the teenager who climbed the remains of a broadcast tower and screamed into the wind, telling the world we were still here. Every act of resistance, no matter how small, became a spark. And the enemy learned something they'd never expected. That humans don't fight clean. We fight desperate. We fight dirty. And when we've lost everything, that's when we become most dangerous. One by one, their ships began to fall. Not from tech. Not from superior firepower. From fear. From confusion. From the wild, unrelenting truth that you can't calculate madness. You can't predict love. Or sacrifice. Or a species willing to burn everything just to keep one child safe. They had come to dominate. To erase. To silence. But they had awakened something else instead. The soul of a species that refuses to kneel. And we weren't done yet. Because somewhere in the ashes of a fallen city, among shattered glass and broken steel, a girl stood with a radio in her hand. Her family was gone. Her home was dust. But her eyes burned with the same fire that had scared the stars. She pressed the button. And through static and fear and broken sky, her voice rang out. We're not afraid of you. No one knows if they heard her. But something moved. Something massive. A shadow passed over the ruined city, blotting out the sun. Bigger than anything we'd seen before. It didn't attack. It watched. Waiting. And then it began to descend. Humanity held its breath again. And on that day, the day humanity proved why they should be feared, the world waited to see if courage would be enough. But no one ran. No one bowed. Not this time. And what happened next would shake the universe to its core. The silence on the comms grew heavier with each passing minute. Back at the forward base, tension rippled through the air like a taut wire ready to snap. The technicians moved quickly but cautiously, eyes darting from screen to screen, trying to make sense of the ghost signal that had replaced the survey team's feed. No static. No glitch. Just nothing. A nothing that felt unnatural. Too clean. Like it had been removed on purpose. A young analyst leaned closer to her console, hands trembling just slightly. Sir, she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. There's still something here. Faint power surges. Low-level fluctuations, deep band EM waves. The commander turned sharply. Show me. She magnified the data, filtering the noise. What emerged wasn't a distress signal or an echo from their own tech. It was something else. Not alien, but not human either. It was the kind of interference you got when something was present, watching, listening, learning. Far above the atmosphere, the orbital surveillance satellite realigned without command input. The movement was slight, but it was enough to pull its camera off the grid coordinates they had been monitoring. For a brief second, just one frame, it captured something at the edge of the forest. Something impossible. A structure. No, not a structure. Something alive, shifting, hiding in plain sight, built from angles the human eye couldn't fully track. The AI responsible for satellite stabilization flagged it as an anomaly, tagged it, and then froze. Lines of code began rewriting themselves, cascading into a digital blur. Then silence. Total blackout. The satellite was still in orbit, but it was blind. On the ground, tension turned to dread. It wasn't just the survey team anymore. One by one, systems were being tampered with, always subtle, just enough to plant doubt. They hadn't lost the war. The war hadn't even started. But something was preparing for it. The techs began whispering rumors. Some said the old myths were true, that the dark corners of the galaxy hid things older than time. Others said this was just the next evolution of warfare, something built to mimic fear itself. A few believed the planet was cursed. But most just kept working, too afraid to say the word out loud. Back at the command tent, the commander stepped outside, staring across the dense landscape. He'd seen conflict. Real wars. He'd watched cities fall, friends vanish, whole fleets lost to greed and politics. But nothing had ever made his chest tighten like this. Not even during the last siege on Europa. The wind picked up. In the trees something moved. He reached for his sidearm without thinking. Then stopped. No sound. No footsteps. No breath. But he could feel it, something brushing against his instincts. A presence that didn't belong. And then came the sound. It wasn't a scream. Not really. It was more like a memory of one, echoing from far away, carried on the wind. It came from the direction of the last known location of the survey team. He didn't wait. He called in the scouts, issued the order himself. Go dark. No lights. No drones. Find them. 3 units went out. None came back. At first they thought it was poor weather. Maybe the terrain messed with comms. But that lie didn't hold for long. When one of the body cams reconnected, only for 5 seconds, it streamed footage that no one wanted to believe. One of the scouts, a hardened combat vet, was standing still, gun raised, eyes wide. Frozen like a statue. In the reflection of his visor, a shape loomed behind him, tall, shifting, wrong. Then static. The commander slammed his fist on the table. We need answers. Now. They decided to send in a drone. A prototype. Experimental. It didn't rely on standard signals. It was designed to survive EMPs, mimic organic movement, and adapt to hostile environments. They called it a ghost drone. The engineers had built it for stealth reconnaissance, not survival. It made it 10 kilometers into the forest before the feed cut again. But this time they got a partial backup. The video was distorted, broken into flashes. But what they saw was clear enough. There was a pattern to the forest, subtle formations that weren't natural. Trees arranged in spirals. Stones stacked with eerie precision. Carvings in the dirt that matched no known language. The deeper the drone went, the more these markings intensified. At one point, the landscape shifted, trees that bent inward, all pointing toward a single low hill. And on that hill was something wrapped in a shimmering veil of light and shadow. It pulsed like it was breathing. It didn't move. It didn't react. But as the drone hovered above it, the feed filled with symbols, thousands of them, streaming so fast that no one could interpret them. Then came the face. Not a real face. A projection. Human. Pale. Eyes too wide. Smiling. And it spoke. You shouldn't have come. The voice was layered. Male. Female. Young. All at once. Then silence. The feed ended. The drone went offline. The air in the base felt colder after that. Nobody spoke for hours. They didn't have the words. What could they say? That some entity had mocked their presence? Used their own technology to speak in their tongue? That it wore a human smile like a mask? The science teams began digging. Ancient records. Archived data. Even old Earth myths. They weren't looking for answers. They were looking for patterns. One name kept coming up. Lost to time, buried in classified files and decommissioned black projects. Project Harrow. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But eventually, a retired intelligence officer agreed to meet the commander in private. The man was gaunt, his hands shaking. His voice was low and tired. We tried this before. Years ago. Another planet. Same strange readings. Same missing teams. We sent in everything, drones, bots, even our best soldiers. We thought it was just a new species. Something we could classify. He paused, looking at his hands. We were wrong. What happened? the commander asked. The old man looked up, eyes haunted. It watched. It waited. Then it showed us what we really are. The commander frowned. What do you mean? The man leaned closer, whispering. Humanity is clever, dangerous, unpredictable. But this thing, it doesn't fear our weapons. It fears our potential, our madness, our ability to choose defiance when logic says surrender. It's not just a predator. It's a mirror. That night, one of the soldiers tried to leave. She was found just past the perimeter, standing still, whispering to herself. They're not trying to kill us, she said. They want us to remember. They want us to feel what they felt. When asked who they were, she smiled and said, us. Before we became monsters. After that, things got worse. The perimeter lights would flicker with no power surge. Rations spoiled without explanation. Dreams became strange, shared, detailed. People waking up with the same symbols burned into their minds. Drawn in the dirt without knowing why. A medic recorded her dream. She spoke of standing in an endless field of stars, surrounded by tall figures of light and shadow. They pointed toward Earth, then turned away. When she looked down, her hands were covered in ash. Back on Earth, Command grew nervous. They ordered a withdrawal. But the commander refused. We're not running. Not yet. We need to know what this is, and why it chose us. The others didn't argue. They were afraid, but some part of them needed to see this through. They brought in the last tool they had, an empathic interface system. Illegal in most sectors. Highly experimental. It linked human thought to raw sensory data, capable of translating emotion into information. It was meant for diplomacy. But this time they used it to talk to something older than memory. They sent in the interface unit. One operator. Alone. What he found wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a message. It was a flood. Pain. Grief. Rage. Betrayal. And underneath it all, understanding. This thing, whatever it was, had been watching humanity for centuries. Waiting. Not to destroy, but to see when they would become dangerous enough to matter. Because humanity wasn't feared for its weapons. It was feared for its refusal to break. When cornered, it fought. When lost, it adapted. When crushed, it learned. And somewhere in that forest, something had realized that humanity had reached the threshold. Not of power, but of awareness. That was what it feared most. The operator never came back. His mind burned out mid-transmission. But in his final moments, he smiled. He whispered something they couldn't make out at first. Later, when they cleaned up the audio, they heard it. We are the fire they tried to contain. The next morning, the base received a message. Not on any known frequency. Just a phrase repeated over and over. They've seen us now. The commander ordered the team to pack up. But before they could move, the sky changed. No sound. No warning. Just darkness swallowing the horizon. And something vast, moving just out of view. Waiting. Watching. Not ready to attack. Just ready. And deep inside every soldier, every tech, every mind still awake enough to feel it. A question echoed that no one dared ask out loud. What if humanity wasn't the one proving itself? What if this was the test? And what if this time they passed? But passing didn't mean surviving. It meant something was finally paying attention. And it had plans. The wind shifted again. The trees leaned. Somewhere deep in the distance, something moved, and the ground remembered how to shiver. The story wasn't over. It had just started telling the truth. The air inside the old command center was thick with tension. The machines that once buzzed with life had gone quiet, their lights dead, their screens frozen. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed in, heavier than the walls of stone around them. No one spoke much anymore. Words felt dangerous, like they might crack something that was barely holding together. The survivors had grown quiet, more focused. Eyes that once darted from screen to screen now stayed fixed on the dark, distant hallway that led back to the surface. Something had changed above, something they could feel in their bones. No one knew exactly what, but it wasn't good. He sat by the last working console, staring at a static-filled display. The signal they'd been chasing, faint, coded, possibly human, had come through again, but only for a second. A single burst. Just enough to tell them it was real, but not enough to know what it meant. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what message to send this time. Behind him, someone coughed. Another one. The sickness was spreading, slowly but steadily. They were running low on antibiotics, and the filters in the ventilation system hadn't been changed in weeks. The makeshift medical bay was full, and they had no way to reach the supply caches up north. Too risky. Too exposed. She walked in, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Her face looked harder now, like the days underground had carved something new into her. She didn't flinch as another low rumble passed through the walls. That sound had become normal, too normal. "We have to move," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "And go where?" "Anywhere but here. This place is rotting. We're losing people. We don't even know what's out there." She leaned against the cold wall, watching him. "We know it's not helping us in here." He finally turned, eyes tired but sharp. The signal came through again. Her breath caught. "From the outpost?" He nodded. "It's still active." "Barely. I think someone's trying to reach us." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Just the hum of old systems and the occasional flicker of failing lights. She pushed off the wall. "Then we find them. We move now." He hesitated. "If we're wrong, we're walking into open ground. No cover. No second chances." She looked back toward the hallway, then down at the cracked floor under her boots. "We're out of chances here." That night they gathered what little they could. Ration packs, filtered canteens, the last 2 working rifles. The rest of the survivors huddled in silence, not knowing if this was a rescue mission or the final mistake. Some chose to stay behind, too weak or too afraid. He didn't judge them. Outside, the surface was colder than expected. The air had a burnt, electric taste to it, like something was broken in the sky itself. The clouds moved strangely, like they were being pulled. The buildings nearby were bones now, cracked shells of steel and glass. Shadows moved through them, but no one looked too hard. They moved fast and quiet, staying close to the broken streets, listening for anything that didn't belong. At every corner, every turn, they expected to be seen. The old roads were filled with things left behind: toys, coats, a bicycle with bent wheels. It felt like walking through a memory, but the kind you want to forget. At the halfway point they stopped. There was movement ahead, shapes darting behind wrecked cars, something breathing too loud in the silence. He raised a hand, signaling the others to get down. Heartbeats thudded against ribs. The air felt too thin. Then a voice broke the stillness. A voice that didn't sound human. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Low, deliberate, unnatural. Speaking words that twisted in the ear. They couldn't see the speaker. Just the shape, tall, rigid, moving with impossible calm. Not like something alive. Not like anything that should be. The group didn't move. Even breathing felt dangerous now. Then another shape joined it. And another. She mouthed silently, "We have to go." "No." But he didn't move. His eyes were locked on the shapes, the way they moved, the way they seemed to be waiting. Not hunting. Waiting. Like they already knew. They doubled back through an alley, slipping into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. The enemy, or whatever it was, didn't follow. At least not openly. But from that point on, nothing felt right. No matter which way they turned, it felt like they were being pushed. Herded. By the time they reached the ruins near the outpost, everyone was on edge. One of them had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. Another kept mumbling about seeing something in the reflections of the windows, even though the glass was long gone. The air buzzed with static even without radios. Like something unseen was alive around them. The signal was stronger now, coming from just ahead. A shattered bunker surrounded by collapsed walls and blackened earth. It had taken a hit, clearly, but part of it was still standing. He checked the scanner again. The signal was there. Steady now. Not a ghost. Real. She knelt by the door, fingers brushing over the melted frame. "This isn't recent," she whispered. "But the signal." They forced the door open with a crowbar and slipped inside. The air was dry, stale. Not fresh enough to support life, but not totally dead. They moved carefully, flashlights flicking over rusted panels, snapped wires, and a strange, low hum coming from below. Then they found it. A single room still powered. One console blinking. A chair turned away. He stepped forward and reached out. The chair turned slowly. Empty. But the console lit up fully, suddenly. A video feed appeared. It was him. Not a recording. What? He was standing there, looking at himself from behind the screen. Everyone froze. The screen flickered, static crackling. Then the image distorted, glitched, and something else stared back. Not human. A shape built out of shadow and static and broken faces, as if trying to wear his image like a mask. He stepped back, breath catching. The voice returned, now louder. Coming from the speakers. Twisting the signal. Echoing inside their skulls. One word repeated again and again. "Remember." The screen shattered. And then the bunker began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. Panels sparked. Lights died. "Move," she yelled, pulling him back. They ran. But something was coming up from below. Not fast. Not loud, but inevitable. Outside the air had shifted. The clouds above them no longer moved. They waited. Everything was too quiet. The others looked to him, eyes full of fear, full of unspoken questions. What had they just seen? What had followed them back? And why did it wear his face? But there was no time for answers. Only the sound of footsteps in the ruins moving closer. And a single voice, now clear as day, whispering from the dark. You opened the door. The ground beneath them pulsed, just once, like a heartbeat buried deep under layers of stone and ash. Everyone froze. Eyes darted to the broken bunker they just fled, but nothing came out. Not yet. The wind stopped moving. The trees nearby, charred and leafless, stood still like they were holding their breath. He scanned the horizon, his hand trembling slightly over the grip of the rifle. She noticed and stepped closer, saying nothing, just pressing her shoulder to his. There was nothing comforting in the moment, only a silent agreement. Whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. A faint sound began to rise behind them, metal dragging on stone, gears turning, faint like a whisper but unnatural, like the earth itself was groaning open. The survivors, silent and alert, formed a loose circle, weapons ready though no one really believed they would matter. Then the air itself rippled. It started like heat haze, a shimmer on the edge of vision. But it wasn't heat. It was colder than ice. The shimmer widened, stretching like a tear in reality, revealing something on the other side. A corridor, impossibly long, dimly lit, filled with a low, pulsing hum that vibrated in their bones. And then, nothing moved. No creature, no machine, no voice. Just the corridor waiting. One of them stepped forward. Young, brave or broken enough to stop caring. The shimmer pulled at him gently, like gravity turned sideways. His foot passed through the edge of the rift. And then he was gone. No scream. No sound. Just gone. They backed away as the shimmer began to close, folding in on itself, like a mouth that had just eaten. The bunker behind them let out another low thrum. But before they could react, their radios, silent for days, screeched to life. It wasn't static. It was language. Broken, glitchy, but unmistakably human. Do not trust the signal. You're not where you think you are. His blood ran cold. That voice, he recognized it. It was his. Not the echo voice from before, not the twisted mimicry from the console. This was his real voice. His exact cadence. He looked at the others, their eyes wide, pale with confusion. The message repeated, clearer this time. You've been watched since you left the vault. They know how you think. What you fear. That bunker was never a relay. It's a mirror. It records you. Copies you. The radio crackled again. If you can hear this, you haven't changed yet. But you will. The voice cut out. Just like that. And then she screamed. Not out of pain. Not out of fear. It was something else. Something deeper. Everyone spun toward her. She was staring down at her own hand. The skin on her palm shimmered, just for a second, like the air around the rift. She shook her head, backing away from them, from herself. No. No, that's not right. That's not supposed to be. The shimmer faded from her skin. But it left a silence behind. A terrible kind. Like they'd just seen someone look in a mirror and not recognize what stared back. He moved toward her carefully, slowly. You're still you, he said. But even he didn't believe it. She looked up at him and her eyes, just for a heartbeat, were not her eyes. Then she blinked and they were. The ground pulsed again. A new shape appeared on the ridge. Not one of the tall ones from before. This one was smaller, draped in something like fabric but flowing like smoke. Watch them. It didn't move, didn't speak. But its presence twisted the air around them. The smell of ozone filled their lungs. Then it raised an arm. Not to attack. Not to beckon. To point. Behind them. They turned. And the bunker, now distant, was gone. Not collapsed. Not buried. Just gone. Erased like it had never existed. One of the survivors dropped their weapon and fell to their knees. We never left, he whispered. We never left the vault. This is still it. It's still part of it. No, she said, stepping forward, jaw clenched. This is something else. It's watching us. Learning. It's building copies. He thought of the shimmer. Of the console showing his face. Of the voice over the radio. Of her eyes. Then another figure appeared behind the smoky one. And another. All looked like them. Exact. Too exact. He stared at the one that looked like him. It wasn't moving. Just standing. Waiting. The others gasped. More copies stepped into view, dozens. An army of perfect reflections. And every one of them was motionless as if waiting for a command. "They're not hunting us," she said slowly. "They're replacing us." His voice caught in his throat. "Why?" No one answered. Then the radios buzzed again. A new voice this time. Rough, exhausted but real. "Is anyone out there? Please, if you're still human, don't let them take your place. They're not machines. They're not aliens. They're worse. They're us without the parts that make us human. Without pain. Without doubt. Just the instinct to survive. They watched us for years. Copied everything." He looked at the others. The truth settling like ice. That shimmer wasn't a portal. It was a scanner. And someone, or something, was building their replacements piece by piece. "But if they're us," he whispered, "why haven't they attacked?" The smoky version of himself took a single step forward. And smiled. Not a warm smile. Not even a human one. It was like watching muscle stretch wrong over a skull. He felt the scream rising in his throat but held it back. Because deep down he understood now. This wasn't about war. It was about erasure. The quiet kind. The kind where the world forgets you existed because something else is wearing your skin and speaking your words and sleeping in your bed. The kind of silence that comes not from death, but from being replaced so slowly no one ever notices. He reached for the last flare in his vest, holding it tightly. "We don't run," he said. "Not anymore." She nodded, eyes locked on her own reflection across the ruined field. "We fight. Or we vanish." And the copies began to move. The ground shook as the copies advanced. It wasn't chaos. It was too controlled for that. Each movement, every step they took, mirrored the survivors perfectly. They weren't just imitating, they were rehearsing. Each reflection had watched the original long enough to know how they would react before they did. It was like facing a nightmare choreographed to your heartbeat. The wind picked up again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was warm, dry, laced with the scent of burning metal. Something deep underground had woken up. He could feel it in his chest. The others did too. Some shifted nervously. One gripped their weapon tighter. Another muttered a prayer under their breath, something meant for a world that no longer felt real. She stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "You want us because we fight back. You want what makes us different. But you'll never understand it." The copy of her tilted its head, mimicking the motion exactly. Then it spoke. Her voice. Her exact words. "You want us because we fight back. You want what makes us different. But you'll never understand it." He stepped up beside her, and they both watched as their reflections did the same. All around, the field began to fill. More of them. Copies stepping out from behind the scorched trees. From cracks in the earth. From inside the very shadows. It was like the whole world had turned into a mirror, and now it was done waiting. "They're going to overwrite us," one of the survivors whispered. "No," he said, raising the flare. "We overwrite them." And he threw it. The flare hit the dirt with a dull clunk, bounced once and then ignited, flaring up bright red, searing the air with heat and light. In that instant something changed. The copies hesitated. They all stopped at once. Every movement ceased like someone had paused a video. And in that flicker of hesitation they saw it. They weren't perfect. Up close, under real light, you could see it. The skin was too smooth, the expressions too timed, the movements too precise. They weren't real. They couldn't adapt. One of the survivors, a wiry man who'd barely spoken since they left the vault, stepped out of formation and ran straight at his own copy. The thing lunged at him, but not fast enough. He tackled it to the ground, and for the first time one of them broke. Beneath the skin it wasn't bone or blood. It was code, flesh-colored fiber over shifting panels of light, reacting and repairing like liquid circuitry. The thing writhed but didn't scream. No pain, no panic. Just automatic resistance. He slammed the butt of his rifle down again and again until the surface cracked and the light underneath flickered and died. And the others noticed. "They can be broken," he shouted. Adrenaline surged through them. The fight began. They didn't have orders or tactics. They didn't need them. They had instinct and the desperate, burning need not to disappear. One by one they took down the copies. And one by one more emerged to replace them. She moved like lightning, dodging, weaving, slamming her elbow into the jaw of her copy. It staggered, recovered too quickly, but she was already gone, ducking behind a ruined structure and grabbing anything sharp she could find. He fought with fury but no precision, arms heavy with exhaustion. His copy mirrored him, too closely. It anticipated every move. Until he did something unexpected, he stopped fighting. The copy stepped forward, unsure. Then he dropped, swept the legs and slammed his shoulder into its gut. It folded. He caught a glimpse of the shimmer on its chest before he drove a blade straight through it. They were winning. But only in moments. For every copy they destroyed, another took its place. And then the voice returned. Over every radio, every speaker, every shard of broken tech. You were never the enemy. You were the template. The sky above darkened as something vast passed overhead, so large the sun itself blinked out. Not a ship. Not a storm. A presence. The air pulsed again. And in that moment she froze. She dropped to her knees, gasping, clutching her head. He ran to her. What's wrong? They're in my mind, she whispered. I can hear them. She looked at him, eyes wide with something worse than fear. Recognition. They used me, she said. The shimmer, it copied more than my face. It copied my thoughts. He stepped back, shaking his head. No. You're still you. She grabbed his wrist. I am. But I wasn't supposed to be. And then, just like that, her copy stepped forward. But it didn't attack. It walked up to her, and stopped. Looked, confused. And then it looked scared. She turned to him again, tears slipping from her eyes. They made a mistake. I think I changed after the copy was made. What does that mean? It means the real me, changed in a way they can't understand. And now the copy is breaking because it can't match me anymore. She stood, breathing hard, her body trembling. They can't copy what they don't expect. He stared at her, realization dawning. You're the flaw. She nodded. They thought they had it all. But they couldn't predict what I'd become. A roar echoed across the field. A terrible hollow sound. And every copy stopped. Frozen again. As if waiting for a command. And then, every single one turned their head, and looked at her. She took a shaky step forward. You can't be human without fear, she said aloud, without regret, without making mistakes. Her voice cracked. And I've made so many. She stepped closer to her own copy. And that's why you'll never be me. The copy began to glitch. Tiny flickers in its form. Its expression collapsed, reforming, unable to stabilize. Then it crumpled. One by one, other copies began to twitch. Some fell. Some screamed, not in pain but in broken loops, repeating words over and over. The system, the mimicry, was failing. Something in her had broken their pattern. And now it was spreading. He ran to her, caught her as her knees gave out again. You did it. She shook her head. No, we did. Because we're not just patterns. We're not copies. The presence in the sky shifted again. The darkness receded. Light returned. But just before it did, one last message came through. Only this time, it wasn't from the outside. It came from inside their own comms, broadcast directly from the copies that were still standing. A voice. Emotionless. Measured. You were not the test. You were the answer. Then silence. He looked at the field of broken copies. They weren't fighting anymore. They were retreating. Dissolving. Melting back into light. Disappearing like fog under a rising sun. And all at once it was over. Or so it seemed. The survivors stood in the quiet. No more shimmer. No more voice. Just the sound of breathing. The sound of life. But even as they started to regroup, even as the tension began to drain from their limbs, she looked at him with a haunted expression. There's something else, she said quietly. He frowned. What? She held up her hand. And this time, it shimmered again. But different. Not the same cold light from before. It pulsed with something warmer. Softer. I think I didn't just break the copy. She looked him dead in the eyes. I might have brought something back with me. And just like that, the ground beneath them pulsed one more time. The shimmer on her hand didn't fade. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, catching in the corners of everyone's eyes as they turned to her. No one said anything for a long time. No one knew what to say. The copies were gone, fading into nothing like they'd never existed. But the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. You couldn't erase fear with silence. And even if the enemy was gone, the memory of them stayed. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Her legs felt heavy like she was walking underwater. But the light in her hand stayed steady. He watched her closely. Do you feel different? She nodded, not looking at him. Yeah. Not bad. Just aware. Like something's still with me. But not in a hostile way. It's not controlling me. It's listening. They stood there for a moment, just listening to the wind as it blew through the scorched trees. Others began to gather, quiet but curious, waiting to hear what came next. He stepped forward, voice steady but low. We've been running so long we forgot what it's like to stop. Maybe we don't have to anymore. Someone behind them, one of the older survivors, scoffed gently. The fight's never over. Not really. There's always something else waiting. She turned to him. Maybe. But for once, we ended something without destroying ourselves in the process. That has to count for something. The survivor stared at her for a moment, then nodded once and turned away. They made camp near the edge of the forest where the shimmer first showed itself. No one said the word victory out loud. It didn't feel right. They hadn't won in the way they were used to. But they were alive, and the things that had tried to erase them were gone. That meant something. The others slowly began rebuilding, not cities or machines but trust. A small group went out for water, another started digging into supplies. For the first time in what felt like years, people spoke without flinching. They laughed in short bursts. They looked up at the sky and didn't feel the need to scan for movement. She sat by the fire that night, staring at her hand. The shimmer had faded into a soft glow, like the last embers of a fire refusing to die out. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel it there, like a distant memory echoing in the corners of her thoughts. He sat beside her. You think it's gone? No. Just asleep. Or waiting. I don't know. He poked the fire with a stick. Sparks rose into the night. You scared? She smiled a little, sad and honest. A little. But less than before. Whatever it is, it chose not to consume me. Maybe it wants to learn. From you? She looked at him, eyes catching the firelight. From us. From humanity. He nodded slowly, letting that sink in. For generations humans had feared the unknown. Fought it. Tried to beat it back or tame it. But this time they'd faced something that mirrored them, tried to be them, and in the end, couldn't. Because humanity wasn't just strength or stubbornness or even survival. It was change. It was heartache and love and betrayal and forgiveness, all wrapped in the same skin. It was something no machine, no copy, no perfect system could ever fully capture. That's what saved them. Not weapons. Not walls. But the unpredictable nature of who they were. Days passed. The shimmer never returned. The presence in the sky was gone. The air felt lighter, like something enormous had passed overhead and left the world just a little freer. People began to move again. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. Other groups of survivors emerged from deep bunkers and shattered colonies. Some were suspicious. Some were broken. But all of them heard the same thing, that the enemy was gone, and that humans had held the line. In time they found the remains of what the enemy had left behind. Empty shells. Strange machines. Pieces of broken code still flickering in old tech. But none of it attacked. None of it rose again. Whatever force had driven the copies had left. And they never figured out exactly why. Some believed the shimmer had been a weapon gone wrong. Others thought it was a failed experiment to preserve life through imitation. But a few believed something more. That the copies weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to understand. Trying to become something more than they were. And in doing so they realized something terrifying. They could never be human. She led a team north, to where some of the first vaults had been sealed. Along the way they found more survivors, more fragments of a life that had once stretched across the stars. But she didn't talk much about what happened in the field. Not until someone asked her directly. Did you win? A child asked one night by a different fire, their eyes big and honest. She thought about that for a long time. No, she finally said. We didn't win. We endured. What's the difference? She smiled. Winning ends a war. Enduring means you carry the story forward. That seemed to satisfy the child, who soon drifted off to sleep. But the words stayed with her. The shimmer in her hand had faded almost completely now, but it still warmed at night. A quiet reminder. Not of danger but of what they'd lived through. Of what they'd taught, something that was never supposed to learn. He stayed close. They didn't talk about what they were or what might happen next. But they moved together. Step by step. Like they'd done since the beginning. And when he looked at her, he didn't see a weapon or a symbol or something changed by the enemy. He just saw her. One day, deep in the mountains, they came across a chamber. It was old, hidden behind a broken cliff face, untouched by time or war. Inside were walls covered in symbols, human ones. Stories etched in stone. History recorded without the shimmer, without tech. Just truth. She stared at the carvings for a long time. It wasn't about battles. It was about people, faces and hands and tears and laughter. Names long forgotten, remembered now in the silence of that room. She turned to the others. We'll build here. Not because it's safe but because it remembers. And they did. They rebuilt slowly. Carefully. The world wasn't what it had been but it still had room. Room for food and shelter. for memory and meaning. For humans to write their story on their own terms. Years later, when the shimmer was nothing more than a myth to the next generation, a monument stood at the edge of the old battlefield. It wasn't grand. Just a stone with words carved simply. We were not perfect, but we were real. And beneath that, humanity endures. She visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. And every time she touched the stone and remembered the shimmer, not with fear but with quiet respect. Because whatever it was, whatever they had been, had looked into the human soul and backed away. And that was the story that survived. Not one of fear, but of understanding, of hope. And long after the last shimmer faded, long after the system shut down and the light left the sky, that story lived on. In voices, in memory, in the hearts of those who came after. Humanity bowed to no one, not because they were the strongest, but because they felt. And that was something even the stars couldn't replicate. The end.